making lasting changes that will, and I need someone, Lance, would you go back there and just hit that arrow button? I'm really sorry. Our computer, if anyone knows anything about this just started like a month ago. The one computer freezes up, and you'll have to take the mouse, Lance, and go to the arrows on the thing. It's like something else kind of takes over and becomes the active window. But once someone physically makes it the active window again, then we won't have any troubles, and I'll be able to do it. So thanks, Lance. That's all good. So making lasting changes that will make a difference. And he's getting near the end of his book now at this point, and obviously we're getting near the end of our quarter. Just one more lesson next week from Moore's book, Convictional Kindness, and then we'll have our conclusion, love, grow, serve, and go. So I do want to start. I haven't actually read from these books, hardly. I've done a few quotes from them here and there, but I do like the way he starts this chapter. And I'll just tell you right off the bat that I don't know if I buy everything in the chapter, and I'll point some things out as we get to them where I don't necessarily have disagreement, but where I think we need to tweak a little bit of what's being said. So he writes, your church has entered a new era. To be clear, your church was already moving in that direction, but the pace has been greatly accelerated by the pandemic. Where you are today in terms of rethinking and retooling your ministries probably would have taken another 5 years without the coronavirus, but those changes were coming. There's an important truth to be understood and embraced. The pace of change due to the pandemic has been dramatic for many churches. Many leaders are uncertain how to lead in this new environment. Many church members are confused and fearful. Where do you go from here? At this point, no one can know precisely what lies ahead. In fact, it could be years before we arrive at any semblance of what becomes the new normal. You're navigating uncharted waters, and every day will bring new challenges. To lead successfully, you will have to pivot. To lead successfully, you will need to make some changes on the fly. This may be the last thing you want to hear, but to lead successfully in the post-quarantine church, you will have to lead without total clarity. You'll have to lead with a lot of uncertainty. If anything has become clear, it's this: you can no longer lead according to bygone expectations, perspectives, and methodologies. A new era requires a new approach if you want to successfully reach the people God has placed in your path. But before we take a closer look at the need for change, let's step back and remind ourselves of two things that never change. And he puts God's wisdom and faithfulness. And then he'll point out shortly after that a bunch of passages in the book of Acts that talk about how the Christians were devoted to prayer, and they were devoted to each other, and they were devoted to the word, to the apostles' teaching. Of course, they didn't have the word like we have it today. They didn't have Bibles. In fact, people didn't have Bibles that they carried around themselves for another 1900 years probably, for the most part. And so for most of the time that Christianity's been in existence, people haven't had this. So it's still the Word of God, but it was being passed down through people. And of course, it was being read. There were copies in churches, but being read from the pulpit, and then people just had to try to remember stuff as they lived their lives. It might have been, in some senses, and you already know what I'm going to say, it might have been a little bit better. We might have actually had to implant this stuff on our hearts instead of having it as a crutch all the time. And I'll quickly say, I'd much rather have 100 copies of the Bible, and I'd much rather have the Bible on my phone in 90 some versions just on one site. I'd much rather have that than not have access. So anyway, just take what I said with a little bit of tongue in cheek. But God's wisdom and his faithfulness never change. And the fact that we need to cherish and be devoted to God's proclamation never changes. And devoted to prayer never changes. Devoted to fellowship never changes. So in the midst of all this change, and people have gone through way more changes than we've gone through in the last year and a half throughout history, for sure. I mean, we're kind of wimpy, really when it comes down to it. People have dealt with way more than what we've been dealing with. But still, no matter what you're going through, whatever is there at the forefront during anyone's time of life, changes happen. And we deal with the changes, and we might change the way we do things, we might change the methods we use, but the core never changes. And I think that's where we've been able to come through this very, very strongly for the most part. Again, we know we have exceptions. We know we have people that this hurt their faith. But a lot of people grew in their faith during this time. So we recognize all that. But as a whole, I think the grounding and the foundation, ultimately, which is Jesus Christ, has held us together and made a night like this possible. We have this adult class. We have an adult class downstairs. We have people, someone trying to join, another person. We have people online, and and all this is happening. And we have a teen room back there with, I don't know what they've been having on Wednesday nights, a dozen to 20 teens back there. That's a pretty, well, I should say, 6 to 50 teens. I know it's in that range. So anyway, but we've got a teen class back there. We've got a bunch of children's classes going on. The nurseries are now, there's some classes for the real little kids, and things are happening. And I think we all feel, hey, we're gonna be all right. We're gonna make it. So even though these things are true that are up on the screen for you, God's wisdom and faithfulness never change. And so, talk about changes. Our sermon series for the fall is on Elijah, and one of the stories obviously will be Elijah on Mount Carmel, and he's fearing for his life. There's been a drought. And here we go, he's up against all these prophets of Baal, and they're pouring water all over his sacrifice, even though there hasn't been rain for 3.5 years or close to it. And, can you imagine the people? Can you imagine them watching this water being dumped into this trough and on top of a sacrifice and everything else? And talk about changes. And then Elijah has this amazing victory. And then what happens to him? Do you remember? He has that Rocky Mountain experience. Or mountaintop experience. Rockies for us, right? But anyway, and then he plummets into the valley. He's so depressed he wants to die. It almost sounds like Job when Elijah's talking to God. He said, I just want to die. And God tells him, you know what? You're not alone. Are you kidding me right now? If God spoke that way. I've got all my people, but we go through good times and bad times. We go through changes and all sorts of things, but God does not change. And I appreciated Mike's prayer. I think he's teaching back there. But I appreciated his prayer, just talking about how, God, we do know. We know, Father, that you know everything that's going on. You're aware of it. Help people in Haiti to know that you care about them. Just a very realistic acknowledgement that God is there, and he does care so very much. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And our devotions are the same. Ultimately, our devotion, of course, is Jesus Christ himself. All right, so I'm going to move really quickly now, just because I think these things are interesting to hear. And these are some things, just a short list of things to avoid in leading change. And I need to say one other thing before I go through these. This is for all of us. He wrote this chapter possibly with a focus on elders and evangelists and deacons and Sunday school teachers, people in leadership roles, but we find really quickly in life, don't we, that we're all in leadership roles to some extent, and we all make a difference. And everything you're going to hear tonight is something that you can implement in your life, no matter what your situation is. Whether you have kids or don't have kids, whether you're married or you're not married, whether you are in your 20s or in your 80s, these things can apply to all of us. For those of us who do have leadership roles in the congregation, a little extra oomph in this for us to think about. But here are some failures that he talks about. One, having a lack of urgency. And I think we've done really well with feeling the urgency of responding to things. And not just responding, I'll say very quickly, being proactive in a lot of ways. So, but anyway, these are things that churches, and that people should avoid. Avoid a lack of urgency. And I'll just quickly with that one mention, I think we sometimes lose that urgency concerning souls. We sometimes lose the feel that, we get lured into a feeling that we've got all the time in the world. And, maybe that's something that the pandemic helped us with, that we don't necessarily feel that way anymore. Failure to gain influential allies, and this is worded almost like what a politician might have in his little agenda, but what he really gets into in this little teeny section is you need help. So no matter what your role is in life, it's tough to do things alone. You need a team. You need people with you. You need support. And so obviously the way the church is designed, obviously the elders always have support because there's not just one, right? We don't have one pastor. And so, some of these things are already built in to the way the New Testament talks about church structure. But again, whether it's the elders here, the deacons here, a married couple here, we need to be a part of a team. We need to have help no matter where we are in our lives or what we're trying to accomplish. Failure to create short-term wins is something that we don't want to do. We need those short-term wins, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second with the each one reach one that Greg has been talking about. Failure to communicate 1,000 times more, and he says, well, that's probably a hyperbole, and then he says, probably not. And so this is part of what we want you all to be involved in with us in our social media. And you may hate social media. I'm very close to hating social media. I don't quite hate it, but I'm really close to hating it. Greg wanted me to look at something on Facebook the other day, and I said, Greg, I get on Facebook once a week, maybe, because if I get on it, I'll be on it for 3 hours. It's just I can't handle it. It's like with YouTube. Oh, that's a funny video. Oh, look, it started this funny video. Oh, look at that. I remember that from the Jeffersons back in the 70s. That I mean, how many rabbit holes can we go down? So anyway, but even if you don't like social media, when you come in the building on Sunday, how do you say where you are? What's that called? Checking in. Check in here at the church building. And every single thing we do, what'll happen, and this is our goal. And Brandon Edwards, who was here, of course, for Family Week, he's kind of a guru when it comes to social media. He mentioned that with their congregation of 30, that's what they have at the Nashville Church of Christ. Of course, they're in total chaos as far as structure and a place to meet and all that kind of stuff. But they have 30 people, and they, within months, were able to make, if someone puts in Nashville and Church of Christ, they are the first one that pops up. And even if they just put Nashville and Church, I think they are the first ones that pop up. With just 30 people just consistently liking and hashtagging everything with Nashville Church. And so with us, if we just start doing that, when you see something on the church's Instagram or Greg's Instagram, Landon's, Josh's, when you see stuff, just share it. And then when you share it, if you feel like it, just sharing it will be great. But if you just put, hashtag church, hashtag Fishinger Road, hashtag Church of Christ, add some of those hashtags, and that's how Google determines what shows up first. And so with 300 people, we can get to the top of a Central Ohio search for Christian, Church, Christ, pretty quick, hopefully. So that's part of what we want to accomplish. So even, like I said, if you don't like social media, still, help us out with that. And that's a way we can communicate thousands of times pretty quickly. Giving obstacles too much attention. And these, we all know this is stuff, this isn't just for Lita, this is for anyone in the world. To live a good Christian life, we cannot get caught up in the negatives. We just can't afford to. Christianity is positive. Jesus was on the move in a positive way. Every now and then, he had to come down on people, the Pharisees, Sadducees, teachers of the law, woe to you. He did it, and he did it truthfully and the way it ought to have been done. But his overall message was forgiveness and grace and love. And, we need to not let the troubles be too much of a hindrance for us, because there's always something wrong. If that becomes our life, where we're just always looking at what's wrong, we're not going to be spreading good news very, very well. So I'm one behind for you guys online. Okay, there we go. So those are the obstacles. Those are a few things to avoid that he lists there. But here's where I want us to focus on: 7 ways to lead for lasting change. And again, you can almost take the word lead out of there. 7 ways to make lasting change in your life. And again, if you are a leader, then leader of your family, leader of the PTA room at school, if you're a team, whatever you are, whatever way you might lead, these things can apply in that way as well. So remind people of their biblical hope, and we'll stick here for just a second. He doesn't put a lot of scripture in there, but he does reference Hebrews 11, as you would imagine, and I want us to as well. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, as you know, it's a pretty long chapter, but I want us to notice some of the truths here. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And right in the first verse, we see kind of what we've been going through the last year and a half. We have to have a hope. We have to have an assurance in our lives. Of course, for those of us in Jesus Christ, it's very clear. It's crystal clear. We know where we're going to be 10,000 years from now. There's no doubt about that. We can have assurance of that, not because we're great, but because of Jesus' blood. We can have confidence in that. We know where we're going to be. And the conviction of things not seen, I don't want to stretch this in any way inappropriately, but even if we're in an unseen stretch of life, right? We didn't know exactly how the last year was going to go. We didn't know exactly how the last 18 months were going to go. We don't really know exactly how the next year and a half is going to go culturally. And we never know specifically how much time we have left, what's going to happen in our lives. Lots of crazy things can happen. But even when we can't see our path, we know the things that the things not seen up there are talking about in the passage. The conviction of salvation, of God the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, of heaven, of the things that are not visible. But that's what faith is all about. We're told if we could see it, it wouldn't be faith. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. God, I think part of our being made in the image of God is that we can create things. But obviously we don't create things out of nothing. We don't create things out of things not seen. We don't create something out of the invisible into being the visible. And then dropping down a few verses, without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. And I think we've done okay. You're free to disagree with me, but I think overall, during the pandemic, I think we tried to communicate hope. Greg's whole sermon series for the whole year and a half have been about hope. And then as we came out, about equipping and strengthening each other. And so really good stuff, and it's all on YouTube now, so you can go back and you can watch any of that you might want to. A very specific example is Abraham. And one of the points here with providing the congregation with, providing ourselves with, providing our little circle of influence with hope, one of the points of that is to look at the people of the Old Testament and New Testament and realize that it wasn't all comfy for them. It wasn't, we're not called to we're not called to a place without trials, a place without temptations. We're not called to a cushy life necessarily in this life. In fact, we're pretty specifically told that we will be persecuted like Jesus was, that the world will hate us because it hated him first. We're pretty much told right here in this chapter that we better be longing for another home. We better be looking for another country. We better be on a path, as Josh talked about briefly in his Devo. We better be on that way to Christ and not some secular, worldly way. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. And then dropping down to verse 13, my favorite little section here, 13 through 16, but I'll just read 13 and 14 now. Talking about all the people that had already been talked about, and I would assume the Hebrew writer is thinking about the ones he's about to write about. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. And so I think it's important as we talk about hope and being one of the main things we need to do, talk about hope and assurance. I think one of the things that goes right along with that, it's not hope in this life, it's hope in the next one. It's a realization of what's to come, and a realization that we're strangers here, we're exiles, we're aliens. We're like the Israelites were when they were over in Babylon. Jeremiah writes that letter to them, and he says, you know what, you better settle down. You're going to be there 70 years. You better build houses, you better have kids, you better get jobs, you better do all the stuff that you know you need to do, because you're going to be here a while. Well, that's us. That's the same message to us. We're not where we belong, and we don't have any trouble. We don't get to age 20 and think, yeah, you know what, this isn't my home, so I'm not gonna live anywhere, and I'm not gonna have kids, and I'm not gonna do this, I'm not gonna do that. We don't do that. We have the opposite problem that the Israelites had. We are very, very comfortable here, and that's what we need to make sure we keep in perspective and maybe change a little bit. And then just a little bit more here from Hebrews. Another very uncomfortable thing, Abraham was tested. Not only did he have to wander off, but he was asked to sacrifice Isaac. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. And how cool is that? But anyway, same is true for us. No matter what we go through, we need to preach hope in your individual lives. All of us, we need to be reading about hope, reading about heaven. Paul said when he wrote the Thessalonians, encourage each other with these words, talking about the coming of Christ and talking about how that would go. And then we've got all these other people. What more shall I say? And then he goes ahead and says more. But anyway, people who gave it all for the Lord. And then I couldn't resist. I'll go through the other main points much more quickly. But Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, all the people in Hebrews 11 specifically, but of course all the people in our lives. Greg just recently said something that I liked to share, especially with young people. We've got witnesses right in this room. I mean, we are witnesses. We're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. He's talking about those people in Hebrews 11, but that didn't stop. There are still witnesses, and we are those. So since we are surrounded by all those Old Testament people, all those New Testament people, and each other, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. I think Carrie read this as he presided over the Lord's Supper last Sunday. I forget which service it was, but at 9 or 11:15. Jesus did it all for us. We are to consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. So hope, and particularly hope in the gospel and the whole gospel message of the cross, that keeps us going. And so that needed to be number one, and I'm glad Rainer put that number one. Remind people of their biblical hope. Anyone want to make any comments? I know you guys are comfortable just raising your hands or speaking up, but I just wanted to pause for a second and see. All right. So remember, cultural change comes last. And when I read that, I was like, okay, what in the world does he mean by that? And here's what he means by that. He means that to have a revolution, if you will, or to make a change even in your own life, like even personally, even me, Clay Brown, you have to practice things. You have to do them first before the change becomes more natural and more complete. So whether we're talking about the culture of a congregation or talking about the culture broadly of our nation or our state or our city, whatever it might happen to be, we have to make the changes and make them real, and then slowly but surely it will spread. And that's what he's really getting at. And so before Michael Jackson faced all his, troubles, he had a song called "Man in the Mirror," and it just hit me at a time in life where it was, I was very impressionable, and he was right. If you want to make a change, you got to start with the man in the mirror. So, because he was talking about world change, he did all songs benefiting Africa and other. I mean, he did lots of huge things. But he realized if you really want to make a change, I think that might be how he worded it, if you really want to make a change, start with the man in the mirror. We do have to start right here. And so if I want to make a change in my family, or let's say I want to make a change here at Fishinger and Kenny, I better be looking in the mirror and making sure I'm living that. Because it's pretty empty, for someone to, although Jesus said concerning the Pharisees, but they were, how much he loved the Pharisees. Anyway, I shouldn't have used the word love. But anyway, because he did love them. But he, he said, yeah, listen to what they're saying, but don't do what they're doing because they are scum. And so anyway, but for the most part, people aren't going to listen. They're not going to be influenced by us in any way unless we're doing it first. And so that's what we need to do. So cultural change comes last. It just means we need to be doing things even if the world hasn't changed around us. We need to do the right thing in the congregation even if everyone else isn't doing it yet. And we can spread it and we can make it real for us and then for others. I thought of the Good Samaritan. A Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, the man who was beaten up, he had compassion. He went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Even among secular people, the Good Samaritan is mentioned because he did the right thing. He made a difference, and he didn't wait for everyone else to do it. He did it, and that's what we need to do. We need to be proactive. We need to be on the move for Christ, no matter what's going on around us. Visible action steps are essential, and so here I'm going to plug Greg's. How often do you plug someone's bulletin fronts? But that's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to plug the content of the bulletin fronts, not necessarily the bulletin fronts. But anyway, Greg's been doing a series on the front of the bulletin. That's his title, Good News, Keeping the Faith and Sharing the Faith, Building the Lord's House one soul at a time. And he's done 3 of these so far. Is there one for this Sunday, Amy? Is he doing another one? You don't? Oh, he hasn't done his front yet. He's only got a few days. He'll get it done. So anyway, I know you can't really read that too well, but this is what I was talking about earlier. Share and like our social media stuff online. Try to make a difference with that. But notice the second thing down right here. Each one reach one. Invite friends and family. And that's concerning the friends and family down August 29th. So taking a baby step. So what does Greg want us all to do? Invite just one person. I mean, hopefully more, but invite one person to come on that Sunday night. If you don't normally come on a Sunday night, which you guys are here on Wednesday night, so probably you do, but if you don't normally come on Sunday night, take that little baby step and come on Sunday night and be part of that thing. So anyway, each one reach one. And we know, I mean, we used to do mass mailings back. Wallingford did one of our first Fishinger and Kenny mass mailings. And we sent out, I think, 10,000, and I think even back then they knew all the stats. If you send out 10,000, I don't even think it's 1,000, but maybe 1,000. I'll round these things. 1,000 people will open it, 900 people or 9,000 people are just going to throw it in the trash. But 1,000 people will open it. And then of those 1,000, 100 will read it, and 90 will throw, and 900 will, man, boy, just ignore my zeros on these numbers totally. But anyway, the bottom line is you send 10,000, you'll probably get 10 people. But we got way more than that because this was targeted a little more, aggressively. It only went to people who had kids. And so obviously they wanted, a nice biblical thing for their kids. This is back when people wanted that. So anyway, we knew the percentages, and we know this. Greg knows. He knows if everyone invites one, we're not going to have 300 guests that night. He knows that. But you know what? If we don't invite person A, there's no way person A is going to come, right? If you don't invite them at all, there's zero chance. So let's make personal invitations. Let's make that happen. And here's a couple make a difference. And then last week's was people are hurting. The same stuff down the left side. Focusing in on the Friends and Family Day. And let's all just take a baby step. Take a chance. The flyers are out there. Oh, I brought one in here so I can show you. There they are. Greg's very proud of the bratwurst on the front. So, and you don't have to eat a bratwurst if you don't like bratwurst. But you can have a hot dog or some kind of side. But anyway, so just, again, if we're going to make a difference, visible action steps are essential. And here's a little step that we can all take without too much pain at all. He mentioned allies. If you don't have allies, if you don't have people on your team, that's a weakness. So make sure you don't neglect that. And he still puts it in here in this list. And obviously, we need each other. Notice the last phrases there. When each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. The fifth one here, communication must increase exponentially. And, it's hard. Let me just make a little side comment here. Sometimes we can't help how many emails we send out in a day. From the church office, we just can't help it. Things happen. There are updates. You can delete them. I'm giving you permission that if we go over whatever number is your max, some people don't want to get more than one. Some people, you sent 5. I don't know. Whatever your number is, just delete them. Don't get mad at us. We can't help it. But anyway, communication, we have to keep communicating. Every single study in the world shows that to be true. So, or you know what you can do? You can actually block us. If you don't like the emails, just block us. And then they'll all go in your spam folder. And then once a year, you can go in there and read the 400 emails if you feel like it. Okay, those are just stupid suggestions. But anyway, concerning communication, Jesus is the ultimate communication. He was actually called the Word, and the Greek word for word is, it's not broad, but it's more meaningful than our word, just word. It's communication, it's revelation, it's proclamation. Probably the best is communication. In the beginning was the ultimate communication. And this ultimate person who communicates, this ultimate person who is the Word, was with God. And this one was God. And then we're told in verse 14, we figure out who that is. If you were reading John for the first time, you wouldn't know exactly. And then in verse 14, the Word became flesh. So the ultimate revelation, proclamation, communication from God became a human being. And that's why he's the exact representation of God's being. That's why all those unbelievably magnificent things can be said about Jesus Christ. So communication is always good, is what I'm getting at. And we all need to do better in our families. I need to communicate better with Jennifer. You'd think after 35 years, I would know how to communicate. I could say something 10 times and it's like, Clay, what do you really mean? No, I'm kidding. We're pretty good. But anyway, you know how it is with children, with your spouse, sometimes it's just not easy. All right. Now this one I don't like. Leaders must be willing to accept membership losses. Now, if someone goes to another congregation, absolutely. Do we want everyone to worship where they can glorify God the best, where they can worship, where they're comfortable, where they can serve to the best of their ability? Obviously, yes, we do. Absolutely. But I struggle with this because of this parable. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he's lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that's lost until he finds it? And when he's found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I found my sheep that was lost." Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Now, the author here, he's not saying if someone's drifting away from Christ, just let the person go. He's not saying that. He's just saying, you know what, this has been a weird year and a half, and things happen, and people get emotional, and people get a little crazy sometimes even. And, you know, we can't, what he's saying is, don't neglect, now he didn't use this parable at all, obviously, or he wouldn't have had that point, but, but he's not saying, what he's saying is don't neglect the 99, although he didn't say it that way. He's saying we can't allow the alarms in life to keep us from taking care of everyone who needs care, and we all do. I've mentioned to someone who's a nurse once that, you know, sometimes in ministry, I think I said it right in this class, I may not have said it exactly this way, but, you know, sometimes in ministry, we get caught up in just looking for the lights down the hall. You know, who has their buzzer on? Who needs something right this instant? And if we get in that mode and we don't step back for a second, then we don't pay attention to the person who may be in really big trouble, but they haven't pressed their button. And so, you know, it's really important, and those of you who are nurses, we do have something here, I know that you guys do what you're supposed to do. But anyway, but sometimes we get caught up in the emergencies, and sometimes we can't help it in life. Sometimes something does take priority, but we can't allow our whole life to be emergency after emergency after emergency after emergency, because then some really important stuff doesn't get done. So we just need to be careful with that. Leaders must align with the future, and I think we do a good job looking down the road. You know, is this going to matter 5 years from now? You know, from a worldly perspective, is this going to matter 5 or 10 years from now? From a spiritual perspective, is this going to matter 10,000 years from now? And we even need to figure that out. You know, we need to make sure that we're doing stuff that matters eternally. And I'm just going to go to oh, I forgot I have these discussion questions. Come Saturday night if you want to do the discussion stuff. So let's see what slide that is, 34. Oh, I can't do that like this. I don't have a keyboard up here. So speed readers, you got it all. Okay, next week, convictional kindness. And then the week after that is our wrap-up week, love, grow, serve, go. And let's pray together as we close. God, we thank you so very much for your blessings. God, help us primarily tonight. Help us realize that our lives need priorities. We need to figure out what's most important to you, Father, and put that first. God, we need to make sure we are delving into your word, that we are people of prayer, that we are people of fellowship, people of worship. We need to make sure we don't lose sight of the core things. And God, while we hold on to the core, help us to reach out to this world as best we can. Help us to grow as best we can. Help us to adapt the things we can adapt. Help us to adapt those in a way that gives you glory and reaches out to young people and old people and people in the middle and people of all different socioeconomic levels. And just help us to be people who want to attract people to your Son, Jesus Christ. Father, bless all of those that we have been mentioning this evening. And God, I also want to mention Thom Maynard's brother. Be with David and bless him and keep him. And Father, I pray if he's not already been able to, that he can go home in the next few days. We're thankful he got to the hospital and got those stents that he needed. Father, we pray all this in the name of Christ. Amen.